Tonight, in this deep dive, we are exploring the quiet, invisible ledgers we carry in our heads.
And not the ones in our bank accounts.
No, definitely not those. The ones in our relationships. The silent accounting of who did what, who owes whom, and the heavy exhaustion that sets in when love, friendship, or even professional support starts to feel like a perfectly balanced but entirely hollow spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's a dynamic that rarely announces itself. You don't just wake up on a Tuesday and consciously decide to turn your marriage or your longest friendship into a balance sheet.
Right.
It creeps in through the margins.
Yes.
One unreturned favor, one perceived slight, one quiet resentment at a time. And before you know it, you're looking at someone you care deeply about, and all you can see is an unpaid invoice.
I really want to paint a picture for you, the listener, right now, because I think this is a uniquely human experience that almost everyone has lived through, even if it feels maybe a little embarrassing to admit.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Everyone does it.
I know I've been there. So imagine you're out to dinner with a friend, the check comes, and you just grab it. You genuinely want to do this. You care about them. You haven't seen them in a while. And, treating them just feels good.
Or maybe the scenario is at home, it's late, you're exhausted, but you take on an extra chore.
Exactly. You fold the laundry even though you did it last time. Or you stay late at the office to help a colleague build out a slide deck for their presentation tomorrow.
Right, and in the actual moment of doing the thing, your intention is totally pure.
Yeah, you're just being helpful. You're being a good partner or a good friend.
But the feeling shifts almost immediately after the event, doesn't it?
That is the exact shift. It really is. In the quiet moments afterward, like when you're driving home or brushing your teeth or just staring at the ceiling in bed, a tiny, almost imperceptible part of your brain makes a note.
It opens up a mental ledger.
Yes, it opens a ledger. And you find yourself waiting for the return text that says, thank you so much. You wait for the reciprocal favor the next day.
You're waiting for that specific verbal validation that proves they see what you sacrificed.
And more importantly, that they acknowledge they owe you one. And when that validation doesn't come, well,
When it doesn't arrive, the emotional fallout is surprisingly heavy. You don't just feel like a fleeting pang of disappointment.
no, it's way worse than that.
What settles into your chest is this quiet, suffocating resentment. You start mentally scrolling through the past week's interactions, pulling up receipts you didn't even know you were keeping.
I have absolutely caught myself doing this. You just start building a case. Like, I drove to the restaurant last time. I bought the coffee on Tuesday. I initiated the text message thread to make the plans.
And the funny thing is, you don't even care about the coffee.
Not at all. The $5 for a latte is completely beside the point. What you're actually feeling is the creeping, exhausting sensation that your connections with other human beings have somehow devolved into a series of business transactions.
It creates a psychological state that researchers often describe as feeling together alone.
Together alone. Wow.
Yeah. You are sharing a physical space with your partner or your friend. You're interacting. You're going through the motions of intimacy. But underneath it all, you feel as though you have to continuously earn your right to be in that room.
Like you're paying rent on your relationships.
Exactly. Paying rent through your actions and your usefulness.
I like to think of it as having a miniature, ruthless accountant living inside your chest.
I love that image.
Right. This little guy wears a green visor, and he's just whispering about interest rates on every kind gesture you make.
He's constantly auditing you.
Yes. Every time you smile, every time you listen to a friend vent about their bad day, this little accountant is stamping an invoice and filing it away in a cabinet. And eventually, dragging around a filing cabinet full of emotional invoices gets unbelievably heavy.
It's heavy because it runs completely counter to how deep human connection is actually supposed to function. And when we look at behavioral science and relational psychology, the phenomenon you're describing has a very specific name.
Let's name it then.
We're talking about the transactional relationship.
So let's unpack that definition, because putting a name to this invisible weight is really half the battle. What separates a transactional relationship from just, regular human interaction where people naturally do things for each other?
At its foundational level, a transactional relationship is a dynamic built almost entirely on conditional exchange.
Okay, conditional exchange. Meaning?
It's a relationship where affection, attention, or support is extended only when something of equal or greater value is received in return. It operates on a strict quid pro quo rhythm.
I give you this, you give me that.
Exactly. The underlying message is basically, I will give you this piece of myself, but only so I can extract that piece of you.
It really just strips the humanity out of the bond, doesn't it?
It does. Because in a healthy communal relational dynamic, a person feels seen and valued and safe simply for existing. Their worth is inherent.
They don't have to earn it every day.
Right. But in a transactional dynamic, a person's value becomes conditional. It's entirely tied to their performance, their output, and their ongoing utility to the other person.
So if you stop producing, you lose your value in the relationship.
You do. You become expendable.
So that is what this is called. It's not just you being petty or cynical or keeping score because you're a bad friend. It's a specific, recognized relational dynamic where the ledger completely eclipses the person standing in front of you.
And understanding that distinction is so crucial. It shifts the perspective from there's something wrong with me to there's something happening in the mechanics of this relationship.
I want to pause here for a second. If you are listening to this right now, maybe sitting in your car or going for a walk, and you're feeling a sense of recognition, or maybe a profound sense of relief that this invisible weight actually has a name, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to you.
Yeah, we want you to feel seen here.
If you want to continue to understand the deep human patterns behind our behaviors without judgment, without being rushed, we'd love for you to subscribe to the Leone Patterns channel and leave a comment. Tell us if that ruthless little accountant sounds familiar. We're here to unpack these invisible forces together as a community.
We really are. And to really understand why that internal accountant takes over in the first place, we have to look at the underlying science.
Because it's not just a modern problem, right?
Not at all. This isn't just a symptom of modern burnout or hustle culture. If we dive into social exchange theory, which was first introduced by the sociologist George Hopkins back in 1958.
Okay, taking us back to the 50s.
Yes. We find that humans have a deeply ingrained, base-level tendency to act as hedonists exchanging rewards.
Okay, that sounds a bit cynical, honestly. Like we're all just trading commodities with each other from the moment we're born.
I know it does sound cold. But Holman's wasn't suggesting we're inherently selfish, but rather that we are deeply pragmatic. And it's not just material goods like money, food, or shelter that we trade.
What else are we trading?
He posited that we constantly exchange non-material goods too, things like affection, information, validation, and social influence.
Which makes sense.
Right. And if we look at this through an evolutionary lens, it makes perfect sense. We evolved in small hunter-gatherer tribes, where tracking fairness wasn't a matter of keeping up appearances. It was a matter of basic survival.
Because if I don't track who's contributing, the tribe dies.
Precisely. If I share my portion of food with you during a brutal winter, I need absolute certainty that you will share your food with me when the summer hunt is successful.
Or I starve.
Exactly. If you don't reciprocate, I might literally not survive the next winter. Because of these stakes, our brains evolved to be incredibly sophisticated tracking systems. We are biologically hardwired to notice who is contributing to the group and who is free riding.
Okay, so I have a major question here. If we biologically evolved to track fairness to keep ourselves alive, like if this is a hardwired successful survival mechanism, why does keeping score in our modern relationships make us so miserable?
It's a great question.
It just seems like an evolutionary glitch. If the accountant in my chest is just trying to protect me, shouldn't his presence feel good or at least grounding?
That is the core paradox of modern relationships. The reason it makes us miserable is that applying a survival-based scarcity mindset to emotional intimacy fundamentally disrupts our nervous system.
Because the environment has changed.
Exactly. Our environment has changed, but our hardware hasn't. In the modern world, your physical survival is rarely, if ever, dependent on whether your partner remembers to empty the dishwasher or whether your friend buys the next round of drinks.
But my brain doesn't know the difference.
Your brain treats that unpaid emotional debt with the exact same alarm it would use for a stolen winter ration.
Oh, wow.
When you apply that ancient life-or-death ledger to modern emotional bonds, our brains process that constant evaluation as a low-grade, persistent threat. You are continuously scanning your environment for inequity, which means you are continuously scanning for danger.
So our bodies are physically reacting to a missed text message as if we're out in the wilderness getting cheated out of our survival resources. That sounds so exhausting.
It literally drains your physiology. Chronic scorekeeping depletes our adrenaline reserves and disrupts our autonomic nervous system.
There's research on the physical toll of this, isn't there?
There is some incredibly fascinating psychophysiological research by Charlotte Van Ooyen-Whitflet and her colleagues. They wanted to see what happens to the human body when we hold a grudge.
And holding a grudge is essentially the act of ruminating on an unpaid emotional debt.
It is. It's opening the filing cabinet and staring at the past due invoice.
Right.
So they put sensors on participants and asked them to sit in a state of unforgiveness, to vividly keep score of how they were wronged. And the physical reaction was immediate and measurable.
What happened?
The researchers found that heart rates rose significantly, blood pressure spiked, and skin conductance increased.
Skin conductance.
That's a measure of how much you're sweating due to psychological arousal.
So it triggers a literal fight-or-flight stress response just by thinking about an unbalanced ledger.
Just by thinking about it. And it goes even deeper into our musculature. They measured facial electromyographic activity.
Tracking the muscles in the face.
Tracking the microscopic tension in the face, yes. When people are keeping score of an unpaid debt, the corrugator muscle, which is the muscle located right above your brow that furrows your forehead,
Okay, yeah.
and the orbicularis oculi muscle under the eye, they literally tense up. You are physically bracing yourself against an attack.
That is wild.
And when you live in this state chronically, you elevate your cortisol levels, which paves the way for insomnia, cardiovascular strain, and immune system suppression.
Just from keeping score.
You're asking your nervous system to remain in a constant state of hypervigilance, acting as an auditor for debts that can never truly be paid.
I'm picturing that little accountant again, but now he's got his hands on the levers of my nervous system, just pumping out cortisol every time my partner forgets to ask how my day was.
It's a terrifying image, but it's accurate.
That physical toll makes me think about the mental gymnastics we do to justify these ledgers, which brings up cognitive dissonance. There is a famous psychology experiment by Leon Festinger and James Carl Smith from 1959 that I think perfectly illustrates how the accountant actually destroys our joy.
Oh, the classic pig-turning experiment. It's a foundational study in behavioral science.
It really is, and here is where the mechanics of transaction get fascinating. For those listening who might not be familiar, Festinger and Carl Smith had subjects come into a lab to do an incredibly tedious, mind-numbing task.
That look boring.
They literally just turned wooden pegs on a pegboard a quarter turn over and over again for a very long time. It was designed to be agonizingly boring.
The boredom was a crucial baseline for the experiment.
Right. Then the researchers asked the subjects to do them a favor. They said, go out into the waiting room, find the next subject who was waiting to come in, and lie to them.
Just blatantly lie.
Tell them the task was fun. They had to tell the next person that the peg-turning task was actually thrilling, engaging, and incredibly fun. Here's the catch. Half the subjects were paid just $1 to tell the lie, and the other half were paid $20, which in 1959 was a significant amount of money.
If we follow basic economic logic, you would assume the people who were paid $20 felt much better about the whole experience. They got a substantial reward for a minor deception.
That's what you'd think.
Yeah.
But when the researchers later asked the subjects privately how they actually felt about the peg-turning task, the results were entirely backward.
This is the best part.
The people who were paid $20 readily admitted the task was completely boring. They had a massive external justification for their behavior. They were like, I lied because they handed me $20. The transaction was clear, the ledger was balanced, so their internal feelings about the task didn't need to change.
But the group paid only $1 experienced something very different.
The $1 group actually changed their internal belief. When asked privately, they insisted that turning the pegs was genuinely interesting and fun.
Which is wild.
Because $1 was a paltry, insufficient reward for lying, their brains experienced intense cognitive dissonance, that uncomfortable friction of holding two conflicting truths. To resolve the discomfort of being a person who lies for practically no reward, they unconsciously shifted their internal attitude to match their behavior.
They convinced themselves they weren't lying at all.
Exactly. They convinced themselves it wasn't a lie because the task was fun.
And if we pull that out of the 1959 laboratory and apply it to our modern relationships, the implications for the transactional mindset are staggering.
I think it explains the danger perfectly. Think about it. When we constantly tie our behaviors in a relationship to strict, calculated rewards, when we demand the $20 payment for every favor we do, we entirely lose the intrinsic joy of connection.
We do.
If I only listen to you vent about your boss because you explicitly promise to walk my dog this weekend, my brain files that under Job completed for payment. I'm the guy who got $20 to turn pegs. I know it was a chore, and I only did it for the payoff.
You've created an external justification for your love and support.
Exactly. But if we do things freely, without demanding a strict ledger, if we act like the $1 group, we don't have a massive external payment to justify our effort. So our brain resolves that by saying, I must be doing this simply because I love this person, I enjoy taking care of them.
Right.
When everything becomes a strict transaction, we stop believing we do things out of love. We start believing we only do them for the payment.
We systematically strip the relationship of its intrinsic value. We replace the warmth of the bond with the cold efficiency of a contract. And the troubling part is how quietly this shift happens.
It's so insidious.
Moving from a relational dynamic to a transactional one is rarely announced with a megaphone. It shows up in quiet, repeating patterns of behavior. We reviewed clinical research from TherapyDen that outlines several specific signs indicating your relationship may have slipped into this transactional territory.
I think we need to walk through these signs slowly because this is where all this theory hits reality. As you're listening, see if any of these patterns feel familiar in your own life, whether in a marriage, a friendship, or at work.
The first major sign TherapyDen points out is feeling appreciated only when you are deemed useful.
Deemed useful. This is a classic symptom of the ledger taking over. In this pattern, praise, affection, and warmth only arrive immediately following an output.
Right.
You might notice that if you fix a broken appliance or run an annoying errand or reorganize a chaotic spreadsheet at work, you suddenly receive a flood of validation. You are showered with warmth.
But on a random Tuesday evening when you're just sitting on the couch doing absolutely nothing, that affection vanishes. You are met with indifference.
It's the feeling that your birthday or your anniversary has somehow morphed into an annual performance review.
Wow. A performance review.
Yeah, you aren't being celebrated for who you are. You're being evaluated on what you produced for the other person over the last 12 months. You start feeling like a household appliance, valued when you're running, ignored when you're unplugged.
That brings us to the second sign, which is conditional support.
Conditional support is when emotional care comes with a string attached. It's empathy with fine print.
Yes, the fine print.
The dynamic sounds like, I will listen to you cry about your family drama tonight, but you owe me help with my resume this weekend. Or, I'll pick up the kids because you're sick, but I get a free pass on chores next week.
It turns a crisis into an invoice.
That's the perfect way to phrase it. In a secure, healthy relationship, comfort is offered freely simply because the other person is in pain, and you want to alleviate that pain.
But in a transactional bond, offering comfort is categorized as emotional labor.
And labor must be compensated. It creates an environment where you become afraid to ask for help because you know you'll be billed for it later.
Which naturally spirals into the third sign they highlight, feeling immense, disproportionate guilt for saying no.
This one is so common.
In an honest, secure relationship, declining a request is just a logistical reality. You're exhausted, you say no to attending a dinner party, and the other person understands. No harm done.
Right.
But in a transactional dynamic, a simple no triggers a cold, punishing silence.
Because you broke the contract.
Exactly. The reaction is severe because in a transactional system, establishing a boundary is viewed as a breach of contract. If you decline a request, you aren't just expressing a personal limit, you are withholding a service you're supposed to provide.
And over time, this erodes all mutual respect.
It does. The person who fears the cold withdrawal of affection will begin to shrink their own needs. They'll say yes to everything, building massive resentment, simply to keep the ledger balanced and avoid the punishment.
And then you end up in the fourth sign, the endless negotiation dynamic. This is when something as simple as picking a restaurant for dinner feels like drafting a complex, multi-tiered business contract.
We've all been there.
Well, we had sushi last time because you wanted it, so tonight we have to have Italian because I want it, and you have to drive because I drove the last 3 times, but I'll pay the tip because you got the movie tickets last week.
It's exhausting.
It requires so much mental RAM just to eat a bowl of pasta. It's completely exhausting.
What I find fascinating when analyzing this pattern is how universal it is. It isn't confined to romantic partnerships or domestic life. It heavily infects the professional world, too.
No, totally.
We looked at research from RFG Advisory that focused on financial advisor transitions. When a financial advisor decides to leave one firm and move to another, they have to inform their clients and hope the clients follow them.
And the research shows a stark contrast in who stays and who goes, right?
A massive contrast. If the relationship between the advisor and the client has been purely transactional, meaning it was based solely on executing trades, sending quarterly reports, and basic convenience, the client views the advisor's transition as a major disruption.
Because to the client, the advisor is just a vendor.
Exactly. And when a vendor becomes inconvenient, you drop them and find a new one. They don't follow the advisor to the new firm.
Because there's no relational glue holding them together. But what happens if the advisor built a different kind of bond?
When the relationship is deeply relational, rooted in trust, personal check-ins, and understanding the client's actual life goals beyond just the math, the transition is incredibly smooth. The client follows the advisor without hesitation.
They follow because they value the person, not just the task execution.
The pattern holds true everywhere. From marriages to corporate finance, surface-level delivery crumbles under the slightest stress, but genuine connection is resilient in moments of change.
So we've outlined how awful it feels to live like a human calculator. The resentment, the physical tension, the cognitive dissonance. Nobody consciously wants to live this way. So how do we get pushed into this transactional state in the first place?
That's the real question.
I think this brings up something very deep and frankly very painful to look at. What happens to the ledger when a relationship experiences a massive foundational betrayal?
This is perhaps the most critical piece of the puzzle. When we look at psychological data from the Betrayal Trauma Glossary, alongside resources like Hello Prenup, we see a very clear pattern following a deep betrayal.
And by betrayal, we mean infidelity, severe financial deceit, or profound emotional duplicity.
Right. When that happens, it causes what clinical psychologists call an attachment injury.
An attachment injury. The phrasing of that sounds so structural, like snapping a load-bearing beam in the house of the relationship.
It is precisely that structural. It hits at the absolute core of your attachment system, which is the neurological framework that regulates your sense of emotional and physical safety in the world.
When that fundamental trust is shattered.
When it's shattered, the hurt partner's nervous system goes into absolute overdrive. They experience symptoms that closely mirror post-traumatic stress disorder, hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, and reality collapse.
Reality collapse.
That terrifying, disorienting realization that your understanding of your life and the person sleeping next to you was based on a lie.
The ground completely falls out from under you. But how does that trauma response connect to the accountant? How does it lead to keeping score?
When trust is broken so severely, the hurt partner naturally falls back into a deeply transactional state. As a protective measure, it is a trauma response. Because they can no longer trust their partner's words or the implicit unseen promises of the relationship, they suddenly require hard empirical data to quiet their nervous system's alarm bells.
Data. You mean things like demanding access to phone records or shared bank statements or tracking locations on GPS?
Yes. The hurt partner is essentially saying, I can no longer rely on the communal, trusting bond of our relationship because that bond almost destroyed me. So I am implementing a strict audit.
They need transparency.
They need verifiable proof to regain any semblance of footing when the relational foundation is gone. The transactional behavior, the constant checking, the monitoring, the tracking of every dollar and every minute is a desperate attempt to establish safety in an environment that their brain has labeled as deeply unsafe.
I want to pause right here. Let's just hold space for that for a second. I want to speak to you, the listener, directly. If you have recognized yourself in this deep dive so far, if you realize that you keep a strict ledger with your partner, or if you demand a transaction, or require hard data and location sharing to feel safe.
Or even if you just find yourself quietly tracking who emptied the dishwasher last and building resentment over it.
I need you to hear this very clearly. This is not a flaw.
You are not broken for doing this.
It is not a moral failing. It is not something to fix about yourself. It is something to understand. We live in a culture that loves to throw around buzzwords. Society will tell you that keeping score is petty or toxic or that you're just being cynical. But what we're looking at through all this research is something deeply, fundamentally human.
That is the most important reframe we can offer today. Scorekeeping is your nervous system's way of trying to establish safety when you feel insecure, unseen, or betrayed. It is an evolutionary shield.
Shield?
Yes. When you feel that you are not valued for simply being who you are, your brain goes into survival mode and starts tracking what you do because it is trying to ensure you are not taken advantage of and left out in the cold. It's a protective mechanism working exactly as it was designed to.
I think acknowledging it as a shield rather than a character flaw takes so much of the shame away. And what really blew my mind when we were looking through these sources is that sometimes, rather than fighting the ledger, making a relationship explicitly transactional can actually save it.
It seems counterintuitive given everything we've just discussed, but explicit transactions can be incredibly healthy when they are used correctly to build structural safety.
Let's look back at the Hello Prenup data.
Right. They focus heavily on post-nuptial agreements, which are legal, financial documents drafted after a marriage has already begun. Often these are drafted after a breach of trust, like hidden debt or infidelity. Now, society views post-nups as a lack of romance or a punishment.
Like preparing for a divorce while you're still married?
That's the stigma. But the reality is entirely different. A post-nup outlining financial transparency, dividing assets, or setting behavioral expectations isn't a punishment. It is a structural agreement that reflects current realities. It is putting the audit on paper.
Which takes the anxiety out of the unknown. If you have the worst-case scenario handled in writing, you don't have to carry the mental ledger anymore. The accountant in your chest can finally clock out because the actual lawyers handled it.
Precisely. And we see this exact same principle working in everyday logistics too, not just in legal contracts. The Therapeden research highlighted how this works for commuter couples.
Partners who live in different cities for work and only see each other on weekends.
The couples who explicitly schedule resource check-ins, where they sit down like business partners and discuss time allocation, travel expenses, and chore division, they report significantly higher relationship satisfaction than the couples who try to just wing it romantically.
I remember reading in that same data set that couples who implement explicit, rigid budget plans actually cut their money arguments by 30%.
Because clear contracts and boundaries turn potential resentment into predictability. They build a fence around the garden. The agreement handles the transactional logistics so that inside the garden, you are free.
You don't have to keep score?
You don't have to keep score anymore because the rules are clear and agreed upon. The ledger can serve the bond instead of the bond serving the ledger.
The ledger serves the bond. I absolutely love that framing. You are outsourcing the ruthless accountant in your chest to an actual piece of paper or to a dedicated calendar invite once a month. You're looking at your partner and saying, let's deal with the business side of our lives right now for the next hour so that for the rest of the week, we can just be humans in love.
It creates a container for the transaction, which then allows you to transition the rest of your relationship into what social psychologists call a communal relationship.
A communal relationship.
In the foundational social psychology texts we reviewed, they draw a sharp, distinct contrast between exchange relationships and communal relationships. We've spent a lot of time defining the exchange relationships, the strict quid pro quo, the keeping score.
Right.
But in a communal relationship, the guiding principle is radically different. The rule is simply giving people what they need when they need it without calculating the cost or expecting an immediate return.
And stepping into that communal space brings us to one of my absolute favorite psychological quirks we uncovered, the Ben Franklin effect. It completely flips our conventional understanding of how affection and love actually work.
It's a brilliant piece of behavioral science that defies our standard logic. The effect gets its name from Benjamin Franklin, who wrote in his autobiography about a time he was trying to win over a fierce political rival in the Pennsylvania legislature.
Franklin didn't try to win the man over by doing him a favor, which is what most of us would do. Instead, Franklin asked to borrow a rare book from the rival's personal library.
And when the rival lent the book, the dynamic shifted entirely. He actually started liking Franklin more, and they became lifelong friends.
To test if this was a real psychological phenomenon, psychologists John Shopler and John Compier set up a fascinating experiment in 1971. I want to break this down because the mechanics are so revealing.
Go for it.
They had subjects come into the lab and act as teachers who were supposedly administering a learning test to students. The students were actually accomplices on the experiment. The teachers had to watch the learners tap out complex patterns on wooden cubes and then try to repeat them.
A standard setup for measuring social interaction.
Right, but here is the variable. In one scenario, the teachers were instructed by the researchers to offer warm encouragement when the learner got the pattern right. Like, great job, you're doing really well. In the other scenario, the teachers were instructed to hurl insults and criticize the learner when they made a mistake. You know, you're terrible at this, pay attention.
And the crucial part of the study is what happened afterward, when the teachers, the ones doling out the praise or the insults, were asked to rate how attractive and likable they found the learners to be.
Exactly. The results were staggering. Across the board, the teachers who offered encouragement, who did the favor of being kind and supportive, rated the learners as highly likable and attractive.
And the other group.
The teachers who hurled insults rated the identical learners as less attractive and highly unlikable. The takeaway is profound. We actually like people more when we offer them encouragement and do favors for them, rather than when we are just receiving things from them or acting negatively toward them.
It proves that true connection isn't built on a perfectly balanced spreadsheet. The act of giving freely, without stamping an invoice, actually builds our own affection for the other person.
It's almost magical.
The act of generosity generates love within the giver. If you are constantly tracking what you are owed, you are blocking yourself from the psychological benefit of generosity. You are starving yourself of the very affection you're trying to calculate.
And if you want a relationship to not just survive, but truly thrive, you need that positive reinforcement flowing freely. The Gottman Institute, who are essentially the gold standard for relationship research, points out that thriving couples require a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions.
5-to-1.
You need 5 positive moments, a shared laugh, a gentle touch, a spontaneous favor, to buffer against every one negative conflict.
And if you apply our framework to that metric, you see the problem immediately. That 5-to-1 ratio is completely impossible to achieve if every single smile, favor, or chore demands a payment in return.
Because it's not a positive act anymore.
Right. If every positive act comes with an invoice attached, it ceases to be a positive interaction.
Mm.
The recipient doesn't feel loved, they feel indebted. It transforms a gesture of affection into a debt collection. And you cannot build a thriving bond on a foundation of debt collection.
So what does this all mean for you, sitting with this information right now? It means that the ledgers we keep, whether it's splitting a dinner bill down to the cent, drafting a post-nup after a betrayal, or silently fuming over who folded the laundry last, are never just about the money or the time.
No, they never are.
The coffee is not the coffee. The chore is not the chore. Money is never just money.
They are proxies. They are stand-ins for safety, for perceived worth, and for the deep, profound human hunger to be loved simply for existing, not just for what you can produce or provide.
When we keep score, we are usually just asking a much more vulnerable question.
Am I safe with you? Do you value me? Will you take care of me even if I have absolutely nothing to offer today?
We have covered a lot of ground today. From the ancient survival instincts that wired us to track fairness in the winter, to the physical toll of holding a grudge that tightens the muscles in our face and floods us with cortisol. We looked at the peg-turning experiment that shows how doing things for payment strips away our internal joy.
We explored the protective trauma response of needing data after a betrayal, and how sometimes putting the ledger on paper can actually build a fence that saves a relationship.
And finally, we saw how giving freely, like Ben Franklin borrowing a book, actually creates the love we are searching for.
You do not have to earn your place in the lives of the people who love you. True intimacy means retiring the accountant in your mind and allowing yourself to give and receive without an invoice.
If this conversation felt true for you, if something in here landed, we would love for you to subscribe to Leone Patterns so you never miss what we explore next.
Leave a comment and tell us, what did this bring up for you? We read every single one.
We're building a community here, people who think about money and time and relationships differently, not as a number to chase or a spreadsheet to balance, but as a human experience to understand.
You are not alone in this.
Oh.
And we are genuinely glad you are here at Leone Patterns.
But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Think about the person in your life you feel the safest with, your partner, your oldest friend. Now, consult your internal ledger. What is one specific debt they owe you? A favor, an apology, a forgotten coffee that you could permanently delete from your mind tonight, silently, without ever telling them you did it. Same pace, same questions. See them.